I can't hear you.
That's
Hello.
Welcome all Generational Change live Monday night. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter, and I'm repping something that Jen likes to
Okay, yes, Peter went to Rutgers. We all need to know that. Peter is very big on telling people he went to Rutgers. Apparently, that's a thing people that go to Rutgers do.
Well, it's
tell people that they go to Rutgers.
Well, people who go to Northwestern do the same thing. So
they do?
Yeah.
I don't.
I guess only if you're prompted, I suppose.
Okay, so we have a few things tonight. I mean, how do you want to do? Because did you look at the slides? I did a story time for what we talked about. So there's a few different things. Did you look at it?
Yes, I saw some of the stories, and of course, with Florida, there's never a shortage.
No, story time.
Oh, story time. No, I didn't see story time.
Okay, well, I did. We have a story time tonight that you could read, but. Yeah. So what do you want to do? I mean, I see that we have our first guest is there. I mean, we can, we could be fluid.
Well, I would say that if Josh is ready and he wants to hop on already, I say we can jump into it. Josh,
well, I mean, it just other than just starting focus on Florida and, doing that. Actually, we could do some of that with Josh because he is running for Florida. So the fact that we're doing,
that makes it a little more interesting.
Well, so we could do, because normally candidates could be from wherever on here, but the fact that he is a Florida candidate and we do focus on Florida.
We certainly want to highlight any Floridian candidates that are running. And so there's never a shortage of stories. And of course, we are going to address the election tomorrow or whatever. Well, it's not technically an election. It's
the recall. We'll talk about that.
Total recall.
So, guys, we're going to be talking with Josh Weil, and he is running for U.S. Senate against Marco Rubio down here in Florida. Obviously, just anybody running against Marco Rubio is going to get our attention for sure. And my understanding is that this is a non-corporate candidate, and so obviously we're supportive. So that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, this is a very important race, regardless of where you stand right now. I think everybody recognizes that, you're going to need to have a contingency, more or less coming together if you're going to unseat Marco Rubio, even though I do think that the election that you see in Florida has much more to do with Governor DeSantis, but you are going to have the secondary race, which is the Senate race, which is going to be equally as significant. And, we need to have a non-corporate uprising. That is something that we've emphasized quite a bit here. And certainly, we've had Ellen Ellison, who is running for the U.S. Senate. And now we are pleased to welcome in to the studio, who is also running for the U.S. Senate, Josh Weil.
It's Weil.
Weil?
No, Peter was right. Josh Weil.
Eat it, Jen.
But Jesse sent me a text. But Jesse sent me a text and he specifically put a little whale emoji and said Josh pronounces his name like that and put a little whale.
Well, it looks like now Jesse's officially been called out. So
sorry, Jesse, but I did.
Today has already been blame things on Jesse Day, so we can just keep it rolling.
I'm just saying. So talk a little bit about, I really don't know anything about you. Like this is other than you're running for the Democratic nomination against Rubio, but talk a little bit about what part of the state you're in. Like, are you down here too? Are you local?
No, I'm in Central. I'm in Orlando.
Okay. No. Just go talk about like what inspired you. Everyone always wants to know like what your why is. It doesn't need to be some, real, I don't have a tragic story myself. So my why was never very fascinating, but just what really you see are the key problems that are not being addressed that you think should be being addressed. And just a little bit about what inspired you to do it now.
Yeah, so the key problems would be all of them because, as you're well aware, the Democratic Party in the state of Florida doesn't actually address problems or issues or needs. My why is actually kind of similar to yours, Now, I am from Orlando. I'm a high school math and science teacher, so I've been a public school teacher here for the past decade. I work in Osceola County right now. I consider myself very progressive, and to me, being a progressive and where that comes from is about human rights. A lot of my, I'd say, political philosophies or inspirations definitely come from Jimmy Carter. Part of what I think inspired me to make this leap last year was reading his White House diary. and after 4 years of the least successful and most terrifying presidency that, I could imagine, with, probably the worst human being imaginable as president, it really made me, so as someone, I was born in 1984, right? So Carter is not something I lived through.
Yeah, thanks for that. But anyway, you digress. I'm just saying.
I mean, go to DSA meetings, and most of them speak of Clinton like he's the one who freed the slaves after the Civil War. So
I'm always the oldest person at any of those meetings by far. But okay, I do remember Jimmy Carter. But go on.
Yeah, well, and so for me, it was something that I wanted to learn more about. And when I found out that he had published, his memoirs, that upon entering the office, he had met with Nixon, and Nixon told him, just there's so much happening, find time every day, write everything down. And that there would be this kind of firsthand view into the presidency of who I think we can all agree is probably the best human being that we've seen in modern times as president, right? Someone who the success of their presidency can be debated, but the moral character of the human being, I think, is beyond debate. Like none of us.
Okay, so on that note, I just have to stop you for a second, because when we had Margaret Kimberly on, because she wrote a book called Presidential, where she goes through each of the presidents, and she came on, and I was devastated. I'm like, okay, Carter was my last holdout of hope for the perfect president that didn't totally screw the Black population, right? Like, and yeah, that got debunked, unfortunately. But I will agree that
he did not.
The best to date, like, and certainly post-presidency. Certainly. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Sorry for the connection issue, guys. I am back, and there shall not be an issue going forward.
And he's had some things with hindsight too, where, he's learned, but I wanted to learn more about that, and seeing someone, dedicated to trying to do things the right way, and whose entire presidency was based around human rights, right? And this is one of the things that hurt him in the polls, is that, when you look back at the articles about him and the way the media treated him, was that people didn't know what he stood for, because he was always involved in everything. He was involved in renewable energy, and he was involved in the Middle East, and he was involved in agriculture, and he was involved in healthcare, and he was like, everything was his issue. Because to him, anything that was about human rights, there's no priority there. There's no priority where these human rights violations can wait until after the midterms, right? Or these, are less important and we'll deal with them later, or, we'll leave them for someone else. If it was real and affecting people, it had to be addressed and dealt with. And it didn't work fully, per se. Like, I mean, he didn't get reelected. How much of that is due entirely to that? It was definitely a contributing factor. But the fact that that it was possible, the fact that it could even be possible to try to be an impactful politician and affect change from a purely moral human rights standpoint was a little eye-opening. That, like, this isn't just for people with, millions of dollars in their bank account and connections to, Goldman Sachs and lobbyists and such. Like, people can make a change. Like, people want to be helped. They need to be helped. And, we saw Gilham's campaign. I grew up in Florida. We moved down here, I think, before I turned 1. I spent most of my life here in Central Florida. And I have never seen people activated or involved or excited for an election the way they were in 2018 for Andrew Gillum. There was nothing like it. Like, I would be leaving the school I worked at, and all the teachers or other people would be like, who's going out canvassing today? And like 3 or 4 of them would just jump in a car and go to a Color of Change or a DEC group or a DS, like any sort of a Democratic club or whatever it was. There were Young Dems. There were always, like, every day people were canvassing, and people were just excited for it everywhere. And as I've been going around now for the last, keep having to adjust this, 10 months, I've filed for this in December. there's been two amazing things that I see everywhere I go. One is that people tell me that Marco Rubio's never been there, doesn't know where their town is. Like, unless I'm in Miami, they're like, Marco Rubio doesn't know where we are. And this could be in red counties too. The other is that everyone's met Andrew Gillum. Everyone who comes out, any organizer, voter, people who are active in the party, like they'll pull out their phones and show me selfies, like with his bus in the background. No matter what county I go to or where I go, people feel like they met Andrew Gillum. And he's the only candidate like that. He's the only candidate that went everywhere and actually met with the people and made it real for them. And, you know, for me, I felt, you know, and this is as an outsider, as a high school teacher, that if someone was to actually address the needs, and there are so many, 23 years of Republican leadership in this state, there are needs everywhere. If someone was to actually go around and talk to the people and address those needs and build a platform based on the actual needs of the people, not saying this is what we're agreeing on for political purposes and this will be better for you than what the other people have agreed on, so you should, this is it. This is your only option, take it or leave it. But actually building around the needs of the people to address those needs and help them, that there would be responsive, that people would respond to that. I know progressive policies are popular in this state because I've seen them pass when they go as ballot initiatives statewide, when they go directly out to the population. Medical marijuana passes, increasing the minimum wage passes, restoration of voting rights passes, when we bypass the Republicans in the state legislature. And so that's what this has been for me. It's grassroots from scratch. And it's just the idea that people will respond to someone who wants to actually help them. And it's true. You know, it's, to me, our electoral strategy isn't based around, you know, getting more endorsements or more money or anything like that. I mean, money's good. Don't get me wrong. But you've run a campaign, you know, money helps.
Money helps.
Money helps. But I just truly believe that the response we get everywhere we go is phenomenal. And it's just a matter of getting to enough people. If we get this message out to enough people, we win.
Right.
I'm speaking with Josh Weil, who is running for the U.S. Senate in the state of Florida in the Democratic primary. Josh, as a teacher, what made you decide that the U.S. Senate was where you wanted to, you know, first, plant your flag and, you know, try to make that impact? And considering the fact that you are not in elected office, have you been in communication with some of the other candidates who are running? We happen to be, supporters of Alan Ellison, where, you know, we're not endorsing, but, you know, obviously we appreciate the work that he's doing. And listen, Alan Grayson, has done some really solid work over the years. So I think it's incumbent upon, you know, building those relationships being so important, especially in the non-corporate movement, as we like to say. But what ultimately made you decide that this was the route you wanted to take?
Sure. And I want to address the first thing first. So, you know, mentioning the other candidates, absolutely. There's a couple things that I've said from the start, which is that, you know, win or lose on August 23rd, you know, I am going to be traveling and stumping and, you know, talking to people and getting people out up until November 8th. So, you know, whether I turn out to be the Democratic candidate or not, every single person in the Democratic primary is more progressive than Marco Rubio and would be a change for the better. Now, I feel that we need progressives at every level. We need progressives in every race, progressives at every level. We need people who don't just want to maintain the status quo, but people who want to actually build systems, new systems to help people in the world we live in today. Because most of the major systems we have are retrofitted. You know, even when we talk about the New Deal as if it was, you know, like 20, 30 years ago, we're 90 years removed from FDR and the New Deal. We're almost a century away from that. The world's entirely different. And, you know, we need systems to help people, systems for housing and education and healthcare that reflect this new world. I think one of the downsides, or one of the things that tends to hurt progressives, is that they are very all in on stuff. Like, you have to agree. Everything is such an important issue that you have to agree with me on everything. Otherwise, we can't work together. And I think that's been something that has hurt some previous progressive candidates in the past. I'm a big fan of it. You know what? If we agree on 90% of the things, then we can work together on those 90% of the things. And if we agree on only one thing, then we can work together on that one thing. And so, I don't agree with other candidates on everything. Alan Elson's probably the candidate that's most aligned with me politically. He's a good guy. I was just with him. He came out to Osceola to help us out and spoke at our school board meeting, and we stood together, kind of making a statement that, we're political, we're competing in the same race, but we're willing to stand together and ask that, you put in place a mask mandate and, work to find a digital option to help the children in our county. I've met with Al Fox a number of times, and Al Fox, who has been a huge activist for ending the embargo on Cuba for a number of years now. And him and I are in agreement on that. And we've gone out to events and we've done panels together speaking about that. I obviously, I feel that I am the candidate that is most in a line and in agreement with my philosophy. So, I'm my favorite candidate of the group. But every single one of them is better than Marco Rubio. Like, every single one of them wants to do more for the people of Florida and people across this country. In terms of why I chose this race, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is just a lack of satisfaction in what I've seen from the Democratic Party, knowing that our state Democratic Party was going to try to choose a big name moderate candidate because, they have this this blueprint that they've been using for 20 plus years now that they are convinced will work one day, even though it's never worked before. They just need a better candidate. And, they think they've got the candidate this time. And even though they, have not endorsed anyone, they've clearly rolled out the red carpet and lined up one candidate with all of their main donors and, and who's following their playbook. And I don't think that works because that playbook takes you away from the people. The people is how you win. You talk about corporate money, $1 million in corporate money, right, can get you ads, but it only guarantees you the support of the person who wrote that $1 million check. $1 million and $5 donations from small donors all across the state comes with the support of 200,000 Floridians, right? And more than likely 200,000 votes, right? We need to be getting the support, focusing on addressing the needs and earning the trust of people across the state. And you can't do that by only visiting the 7 largest counties and locking yourself in a room to make calls to large corporate donors the rest of the time. We've seen it fail over and over again. And I didn't have faith that the Democratic Party would do anything different. They have proven me right. And I think that can be beaten. We saw it beaten in the 2018 gubernatorial primary. And last December, this is pre-Ossoff and Warnock victory in Georgia. This is pre-Miracle in Georgia, where we thought best case scenario, like if the skies part and we're given 2 Democrat victories in Georgia, we have a 50-50 split with the tiebreak from the vice president. And if you follow politics, you know that is great for the Republicans and does nothing for the Democrats. Because when your goal is obstruction and destruction, when your goal is to block progress and tear things apart, it's very easy to have unanimity in your party. And when you're trying to build complex systems that can actually help people, there's a lot of nuance and diversity of opinion, and you're never going to get everyone on the same page.
No, we take our allies where we can find them and with whatever issue we can have them. And we get a lot of crap for that from different people because they see it as you're not being tribal enough. And which is one of the biggest problems I have with the Democratic Party. But I actually have an interesting question for you because it occurs to me, we're always looking at, like, we have a whole bunch of our local candidates down here that are now jumping in for Alcie's seat. And 3 of them will be forfeiting their seats that are Democrat seats in order for them to climb the career ladder. And we always talk about this. And to me, I'm not a fan of it. It doesn't appeal to me. It says something to me that is not positive. But I actually have a question for you, which is, what are you going to do with your teaching job? Like, what happens to the kids? Like, what do you do coming out of that to do this?
Well, so the good thing is that I don't have to give up a seat, right? I think this is one of the things that makes me gives me a little bit of advantages is that there's no risk for me in this in terms of,
right.
I don't have to give up my congressional seat or anything else in order to make this jump. The way the campaign laws in Florida work is that I'll be able to write myself a paycheck from my campaign to pay myself to be the candidate based on what my previous salary was, right? So if I had Marco Rubio money, I could pay myself like a pretty decent salary out of my campaign. I'll basically be paying myself a teacher's salary if I can afford it next summer. But I'm not taking off. I'm working through the school year this year. I was fortunate enough to transfer into virtual school before the pandemic. That was something that I had lined up and was looking at in order to be able to be closer to my kids' school. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. And that got, once COVID hit, they fast-tracked that and sped up my start date. And so I have the flexibility, more flexibility in my schedule than other teachers do. That's not to say that I work any less, just that I have more flexibility.
You have flexibility. I wasn't asking that like in any accusatory way. I was sort of just saying like it never occurred to me before. Like, we only think about it politically. Because
I don't have, I'm not sitting on, private money. I'm not going to be spending $30 million on ads out of, my personal accounts. I'm on teacher salary, so I have teacher money. And even more than that, my wife is a teacher, so we have that lovely double teacher salary, paycheck to paycheck, even though we're adulting it all day long. And yeah, I mean, it's like, that's how we live. But you know what? People understand that. Like, people, in some ways, I think it's been refreshing for people to see that, look, like, I'm not sitting in some sort of bed of luxury or think that I'm like, I have nothing extra. Like, I have to work. If I don't do my job, I can't pay the bills next month. But every second I have, I am still out campaigning and fighting for you, so that way you can have someone actually representing you in the U.S. Senate. Because we live in Florida. We don't have that right now.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think the importance of, building the bench in the sense that, you need a lot more people involved at the local level, whether it's through, we emphasize the precinct committee captains, people running for city council, people even running for, the state legislature. Those things are immensely important. And even if it takes time, building those relationships, as you are doing statewide, takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. But in the long run, if you're willing to play the long game, there's no telling how much benefit that's ultimately going to yield for this kind of a movement. You are right. Andrew was a exceptionally dynamic candidate. I thought he had an excellent chance to win. I thought that he ran one of the best primary races I've ever seen.
I wish I had kept the newspaper. I think it was in the Orlando Sentinel here. It was the weekend edition, I think the Sunday before the election. And they had said that if he hits 3 million votes, he wins in a landslide. He hit 4 million and still lost. Like, no one expected those. Those are unheard of. The previous record was 2.85 million for anyone winning governor in Florida.
Well, you have to, you got to give the GOP side, their due. They love DeSantis, and that's
they're very good at what they do.
Yeah,
like, we live in a state that has more registered Democrats than Republicans, and yet Democrats have not won a closely contested election statewide since 1994.
94, right. 98 was when they lost the gubernatorial. And yeah, that's, and a lot of that, in my personal, humble opinion, has a lot to do with the fact that the GOP has a much stronger ground game and infrastructure in the state. One of the things that happened when Gillum ran was that most of that infrastructure was brand new. A lot of people got involved that otherwise in a statewide race they had never been involved in before. That consistency is not there, and it is horrifically unfortunate what had happened to him. And, he was the bright shining star potentially of the future. And now that's obviously changed. So, now it's back to square one, but not.
We have to build on that. Yeah, we didn't have a statewide election in 2020.
Not all is lost.
None of our 3 statewide races were up. So we had no statewide candidate in 2020. Now in 2022, we're going to have statewide candidates. And you have to pick up that flag and run with it. Like, you have to reactivate, take what he did and build. We can't look at it and say, well, now we'll do what we did before him and have the benefit of extra people he registered to vote, and surely it will work this time. We have to push every bit as hard and go out to as many people, if not more, and do everything he did and more in order to keep pushing in that direction. Like, that's how, like we joke calling it a miracle in Georgia. It wasn't a miracle. It was 10 years of incredible hard work by Democrats, organizers on the ground.
Well, one of the things that we really emphasize as much as anything is the importance of a non-corporate, non-partisan labor movement. That is something that we are very strong advocates for. And obviously the teachers union, especially in Florida, especially down here in Broward, they tend to be very active, and that's a great thing. Have you been in communication with any of the teachers union local chapters, and have they expressed interest, being a fellow teacher and potentially supporting the campaign?
I have. Now from the union standpoint, as right now, they're deferring to the statewide. The statewide, the FEA will be making their endorsement, and we're going to be considered in that. Not to say that, there's no inside track, but I would like to think that they, would be excited to have a teacher running. Education is a huge part. Education is that one topic that, I tend to go long in my answers anyway. That's the one where I go super long. That's the one where, like, we could do this all day on education. And yeah, that's something we need. Like, we need our teachers active and involved. I said that's where I saw it with Gillum. I saw teachers going out regularly. And it wasn't the only workplace. There were plenty of others, but teachers do tend to, we see it. We see the effects of the negligence from our Republican state legislature. Like, we see the impact that not taking care of people on the state level has on children from all backgrounds, right? We don't work in schools that just get, well, this is the ones that they send the Democratic kids to, and this is the one they send the Republican kids to, right? We see it across the board, and just so much need. Like, it's a word I keep coming back to, but, I'm in Osceola County. We have, one of the highest homelessness numbers and displacement numbers there are. The school I worked at for the 2 years before switching to virtual, we would have kids coming in that, when they were being, it was a school for at-risk kids. And so, when they were being patted down and searched, they would ask to their hotel room keys to not have to take them out and show them, because they didn't want the other kids to know they were living in a hotel. And this wasn't like one or two kids. This was like a solid 10 to 15% at least of our population. Like, the number of kids that are displaced in that community and without home. And, I've been to the BCC meetings and tried speaking, and there's no interest. They actually, before the pandemic, they just disbanded and stopped having meetings of their county committee to address homelessness. They just gave up on it.
Well,
the numbers kept going up.
We can absolutely attest to that. We are in Broward County, and it is the bluest and most populated county in the state, and we haven't made quorum in 4 years. So this is not a mistake. This is how the leadership unfortunately operates, but we are doing what we can to change that. And by you taking the initiative to run a statewide race, that takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of time, hours, sleepless nights, hard work. And we're extremely appreciative that you're willing to do it, Josh. We do have to wrap, but I want to give you an opportunity. It is joshwheel.org. Guys, please go check him out. Make sure that you like and subscribe anything that he's doing social media-wise. If you'd like to get involved, we certainly would encourage you to do so. And make your final pitch. Make your 30 elevator pitch as to why you are the candidate to take down Marco Rubio in next year's election.
Absolutely. I mentioned before, progressive policies are popular in this state. And to me, being a progressive is about human rights. And what human rights means is that if something is a human right, if everyone is deserving of it, then it should be secured for and insured by the federal government, period. We should not, we cannot continue to let the Republicans make it a states' rights issue or say that the state has the right to then neglect or deprioritize people. And we need progressives who have that stance and are willing to fight to make sure that being an American means never being homeless, always having an opportunity to get a job, always having access to healthcare, always having access to education. We are the wealthiest country in the world. We spent $9.8 trillion last year. That's more than 3 times every other country in the world except one, and almost double that country. There is nothing we can't afford. We have every resource we need to solve every problem we have. Every resource except one. The only thing we don't have are 50 U.S. senators willing to vote yes.
Well, we got to change that. Josh, we really appreciate you coming on Generational Change. We are going to do candidate forums as we go forward. So we definitely look forward to having you back again. And I have no doubt we will do a U.S. senatorial candidate forum for the state of Florida. And
we definitely.
Look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Josh.
Have a wonderful evening, Josh.
Well, he's lovely.
He has a he has a little bit of an it factor. I can see why Jesse likes him as much as he does.
I have that, the way we were. Your girl is lovely, Hubble. Your candidate is lovely, Jesse. Look, I mean, anybody that is, to us that's in this for the right reasons and is wanting to serve. And I agree. And I don't even like using the term progressive anymore because it's really being co-opted. And I do like that he equates it with human rights. That's always been, for me, I call that, that's sort of like the justice factor, like that I always say, like, it's about justice. And I just think that's really important. And I think that policies that are all seeking that can be negotiable.
Well, he's also
that's why I don't like to label too much.
No, and I also think like a lot of progressive candidates are getting a lot smarter about the fact that they really need to focus on housing, and that is a very important part of the process. And a lot of people are recognizing that it's just gotten so out of hand at this point that you got to change course, and he certainly gets that, and that's very refreshing. And I have no doubt that other candidates will, but he certainly seems to be leaning very strongly into that. And so. Are we ready with? Yeah,
go ahead. Why don't you do the intro for, for our main guest?
So for you guys, as you know, universal health care is a debate that has been raging in the United States probably since the Great Depression. It's taken on many machinations over time. President Kennedy was a huge advocate for it, never came to pass. He did get Medicare through President Johnson. It was a start. It was only over the age of 65. We also got Medicaid, especially for those living below the poverty line, is very important. There have been attempts over the years to try to get us there, various mandates and improvements to the system, very marginal at best. We did have Obamacare that did pass in 2010. That did move the needle, but not anywhere near as far as it needs to go. In fact, in some ways, it made it worse. We have to look at the bare bones choice that is the one that we really need, and that is a universal healthcare system, which is Medicare for all through a single payer. And there are 3 states right now that seem to have, you want to call an inside track to making it a reality, because as I have stated, and I believe Jen agrees with me on this, the way we're going to pass universal health care in the United States is not on Capitol Hill. It's going to happen at the state level first, and then it'll move throughout the whole country, and then it will get to Capitol Hill.
Because that's like Canada.
It's like Canada. They passed
look, what's funny, and I have to say this before I forget, but you know how we're having Tom Hartman on to talk about his new book on Thursday, which is The Hidden History of American Healthcare. Yes. And I have now become a plethora of information as to the history of universal healthcare. And so, I just want to say, like, it actually, in the beginnings, it was like the late 1800s in Germany, but continue. Yeah. But and this is the direction we're going.
It absolutely is. And, there is an incredible amount of momentum and infrastructure that has been in place. And whether that is in New York or Washington, or in this case, the golden state of California, which does have a bill, Appropriations Bill 1400, which is CalCare, universal health care through a single-payer system in the state of California. We are very pleased to welcome to the show somebody who happens to be the author and knows everything there is to know about universal health care in the state of California, and hopefully we'll make it a reality. And if we can be of assistance in any way, we will be there. Ash Kalra, welcome, the representative of California's 27th district. Welcome to Generational Change.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And you're going to certainly hear from me in terms of taking you up on the offer for help, because this is, this is a movement. This is about legislation, but it's also about a movement of really pushing back against what we've seen over recent decades of just more greed and more pain and suffering amongst the masses. And I think this bill is representative of so much more than whether someone can go see a doctor. I think it really is about dignity and providing dignity to every single person that lives in our state and ultimately our nation.
I think we have talked about a lot. I mean, we've had on the Red Berets from Hull, Washington, and we've had Senator Rivera from New York coming on and talking about New York. What's it called? The New York Health Act. And this is something that we are very much promoting, even though Florida will probably be deep under the ocean before we would ever.
We need them to pass it first and then drag Florida along.
We're never getting it here, so we just live vicariously through others. But we, like, in my head, like, part of our mission is using whatever power we have wherever it's needed across to get it through. And if California is right now, we do look at New York as sort of like the best bet. But let's talk about where you stand on this in California, not you personally, but like where this is status wise, because we feel like New York's about to tilt.
Yeah. I think that, and I'm excited to see what's happening in New York. And I think that in this case, it's a compassionate, healthy competition of which state can get there first. And I'm rooting for New York, and I hope they're rooting for California, because at the end of the day, if we get those two bookends to move forward, I think that will be the tipping point to get a single-payer healthcare system, some type of system nationally, when you get those two large states on each of the coast involved. And so where we are is with AB 1400, which I think, I'm very excited about. I think it's the best single-payer bill that's ever been introduced in our state, and there have been a number of them over the years. It's comprehensive. It has cost containment built into it, which is different than the most recent bill we had 4 years ago. In addition, I'm working really hard on the funding mechanism, because although we all know single payer is less expensive than our current healthcare system, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just flip a switch and all of a sudden all the money that's coming in from different sources now goes into CalCare. There is going to be a need for us to supplant the resources that are currently, coming from different sources into one. And that's why there will be some kind of taxation necessary. But the key is that out of pocket for individuals and for companies, small businesses will be less than what they're paying now. And so I really want to get out there and let folks know that don't get hung up on whether it's a tax or not, because right now you are all being heavily taxed. And maybe called premiums and maybe called copays, but trust me, everyone's paying a fortune, including companies. Employers are paying a fortune in our current system.
Yeah, it's funny. I've always said that to people when the money, and I've been saying this for years, just as a matter of common sense. If you take your deductible, your copay, and your premium, and you add that up for the year, that's your healthcare tax. You've been paying it for a long time, or at least your employer, somebody is paying that tax. It's just, we just don't call it that. But yeah, no, we've to me, debating the cost of this is sort of like debating flat earthers to me at this point. Like, I'm really beyond that. I don't think there is an opposing view. We all know that this is what works better. We see it all over the world, and we know this. It's not uncharted water. So Peter, I know you were about to say something.
Yeah, obviously what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. And it's something that, knowing that the California nurses are behind it, all the progressive groups are behind it. But as I think some, or maybe a lot of people know, California has a supermajority Democratic controlled legislature. However, that doesn't mean that all Democrats are created equal. So with that said, what would you say are the biggest roadblocks within the Democratic Party that you're facing right now, ultimately to get this to Governor Newsom's desk? Obviously, that could be different in 24 hours, but in the meantime, what is preventing that from happening right now?
Well, look, it's the same thing that's prevented it from happening in the past. And the reality is that we know that there's enormous influence from what very wealthy stakeholders. You know, if I tell someone, look, you know, our current a single payer system in California will cost, you know, as much as $400 billion a year, but our current system costs, you know, as much as $450 billion, and yet not everyone's covered. Well, that money is going somewhere, right? And that's going to wild profits. So when someone is making that much money, when corporations, when entities, when organizations, individuals are making that much money, they're not going to walk away from it. They're going to fight tooth and nail to keep those profits. And how does that money infiltrate and impact policy? Well, through our political system. Unfortunately, you know, we've seen, you know, campaign money is just flooding our system over many years, but especially after Citizens United, it's become enormous. Not to mention, you know, lobbyists and hiring, you know, spending millions on lobbyists. So at the end of the day, elected officials are human beings, and they're going to be swayed and influenced in a number of different ways. Not everyone comes into the role of an elected official understanding the different machinations and the different pressures that are going to be felt. And those are real pressures. And in some cases, it's very much, you know, transactional. But in many other cases, it's fear. It's, you know, it's making sure that they're protecting their position, their title, more so than what's in the best interest of everyone in the community. So at the end of the day, yes, 3/4 of our assembly and our Senate are Democrats. We have a Democratic governor. We have 2 Democratic U.S. senators. Our former attorney general is now the head of the Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. The Speaker of the House is from here. Our vice president's from here. We have a lot of things in our favor in terms of putting influence on pushing forward single payer. But at the end of the day, I think elected officials have to make a choice. They have to pick a side. Are you on the side of your constituents, on the people that are becoming homeless because they can't pay their medical bills, the people going bankrupt, the people dying? Or are you on the side of the status quo? And the status quo has literally been deadly.
There's no question that there are a lot of really solid non-corporate progressives that are pushing the envelope in California. At the federal level, thankfully, the names that come to mind most specifically are Representatives Ro Khanna, Barbara Lee, and Katie Porter. Have you had any type of communication with any of the federal legislators that are advocating for Medicare for all, but could see the value in just getting that first domino to fall and getting CalCare over the finish line and creating that much more momentum for a national universal healthcare system?
Yeah, most directly with Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents the area just north of me. And we have done town halls together on single payer healthcare. I support his federal legislation to better facilitate states to move ahead with their own plan. As far as I know, all 3 of those Congress members would support California or any other state moving forward. But obviously, as California representatives, I think that they would be incredibly helpful. And Senator Padilla, since he's been appointed, has been very vocal on single payer.
That's great to hear.
I've been very happy to see that. And
you know what? They say that even if, and look, as supporter Bernie Sanders, we know that Padilla was obviously involved with a lot of the stuff that went on over the past several years. But you know what? Eventually the people rise up and say, no, this is not we're not having this anymore. And eventually you make your representatives follow the will of the people. That's essentially what ends up happening. And I think you're seeing a lot more of that in California, and just as much as you're seeing it in New York and in Washington. And I really think that that's how it's going to happen. Now, with that said,
why doesn't Florida come into play? We're a corner. You could, you know what I mean? Like, it's the most pathetic. It's just so sad.
Yeah, I know. If you think about it, if you think about the corners, you have New York, California, Washington, and then Florida.
It's just sad. It's
one of the reasons why, and I truly believe this, Ash, one of the reasons why things are not as effective in Florida as they are in the other 3 states the 3 states that we just mentioned happen to be the 3 corner states that are fighting for a universal healthcare system. They have very strong grassroots organizing. Florida is not a state that has that. And there's many reasons for it. We're an exceptionally transient state compared to the other 3. And it does have a very hard libertarian conservative lean. And that has, I think, a lot to do. And on top of everything else, the Democratic strongholds, if you will, are in very, specific areas. This is a 67 county state, and the Democrats really only have a foothold in about 7 or 8 counties. So that really just goes to show you that from an infrastructural standpoint, we're really lacking, but we could certainly learn a lot from what you guys are doing. Now, obviously, one of the major issues that everybody talks about, and especially our friends who are very big supporters of modern monetary theory, they always put the argument forward, especially for a statewide healthcare system where a budget has to be balanced. How are you going to pay for it? So how do you sell that when we know that that's the talking point that the corporate Democrats and obviously the GOP just want to hammer away at all the time, saying you can't do it, can't afford it, not going to work? What's your rebuttal? How does it work? And how do you make more people become aware and obviously interested in saying, yeah, that makes sense. That's what I'm going to support.
Yeah, it's always interesting. They never have that argument when it comes to military spending or when it comes to corporate tax cuts or incentives. They like to call that, the incentives, not subsidies, but they never ask that question, but they do whenever it's about something helping the people, whether it's college tuition, whether it's healthcare, and you name it. And so a couple of things here. First of all, is California is the 5th largest economy in the world. We had a huge budget surplus last year, a much larger one this year, over $25 billion budget surplus. And I say that even though we still don't tax as much as we could at the corporate level, we could actually do even more. But that being said, it's not necessarily about needing more money. It's about a reallocation of resources. And the way CalCare is set up, it has a 5-year lead in. And what I mean by that is under the federal waiver process, you have to show within 5 years that you're essentially financially viable. And that 5-year period will be hugely important for California to make that shift. And I absolutely think that shift would be, will be very successful once we're able to prove to the people that, look, you're going to get the same services, same quality of care with it. Now, how do you pay for it? Right now, over $200 billion of care in California already comes from federal and state money, as much as $220 billion. And in fact, with the expansion that they're talking about at the federal level, if they expand to dental, vision, long-term care, and especially if they reduce the age 5 years, that's even a smaller delta of how much we'd have to pay for a CalCare. But that being said, over half of the cost of what single payer would cost, we're already paying for. Now, the other approximately $150 billion or so is coming from private employers and individuals. And so what you have to do is you have to find some kind of mechanism, that a taxation mechanism that's less than what individuals and companies are paying now, that can bridge that gap. And there are ways to do it. Some of the ways, and it would likely be a combination of sources. Payroll tax could be some of it. I don't like the idea of too much being on payroll tax, because I think if you do too much on payroll tax, I think that those that say you would end up having people hire less, it's actually true if you put too much of it on payroll tax. But I think that you can put some of it on that. Again, keeping in mind that these companies won't have to pay premiums. Individuals won't have to pay into healthcare. So as long as that payroll tax is lower than the threshold of what individuals are paying now, I think that's safe. Another area that we're looking at a number of different mechanisms, but one I really like is gross receipts tax. The reason why I like gross receipts tax is, look, as I mentioned, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. People can't just up and leave California. Companies, restaurants, what have you. And what I really like about it is that companies that refuse to pay benefits in healthcare, that hire people for 20 hours a week, like the Walmarts of the world, like the McDonald's, all these companies that don't pay into healthcare really at all, now they're going to pay into it. That's how you get them to pay into it. And that's a huge win for all of us as taxpayers, every taxpayer. because now less of a burden's on us, and we're actually having the companies that are profiting wildly off of us finally paying into the healthcare system where they haven't for decades. We subsidize their employees because they're on Medi-Cal or they're on Medicare or other kind of social safety net assistance. And we've been doing it for decades. Our subsidy of their companies is part of their business plan. But we have to stop subsidizing their business plan and look at how we actually do things in the benefit of Californians. And so that's why I like the gross receipts tax certainly being a component of it. But we can absolutely cobble together 2 or 3 different sources that will easily raise anywhere from 115 to 120 plus $1 billion a year. And keep in mind that as much as 15 to 20% of healthcare costs is administrative costs. You cut that out or cut that down dramatically. If you look at the VA and Medicare, the administrative cost is far lower. Why is that? Because everyone's in. If everyone's in, you don't have means testing, you don't have all that paperwork to show what you qualify for, what you don't qualify for. I mean, that costs our healthcare system many billions a year. In California alone, tens of billions a year. So if you put all that together, there's absolutely a viable path moving forward that could ensure everyone has the same quality of care. And keep in mind, with CalCare, we're talking about having long-term care, we're talking about dental, vision, we're talking about mental health services. These are things that individuals don't necessarily get now. And the other thing that I'll mention is that right now, doctors are incentivized to become specialists because that's where they can make their money. Right now, if you want to be a family practitioner or a pediatrician, it's really tough. We want to focus and get resources to those kinds of family practitioners to focus on preventative health, to focus on kind of internal medicine and the year over year care. And that will also overall reduce the cost. And the last thing I'll mention is a lot of rural communities. If you go in the Central Valley, you have to drive 2 or 3 hours to see an orthodontist if you have to get a root canal. 2 or 3 hours at least, and that's assuming you can get an appointment. That's in California. That's even if you have Obamacare. That's if you have health care. In urban areas, including here in downtown East San Jose, there aren't a lot of doctors that are providing Medi-Cal. So even if you have Medi-Cal, what I like to say is I think it's good that people have access to health care. But access is only one step forward. I can have a business card for a Lamborghini salesman. Well, I have access to a Lamborghini. I can look at my bank account and say, wait, well, I actually can't afford one. So you can have health insurance. It doesn't mean you can access it meaningfully. And so that's the big difference here is that like the good thing is that at least for catastrophic care, in that sense, the ACA is a good thing that if you had a catastrophic, but what it doesn't account for is the fact that people are not going to the doctor regularly. So chronic illnesses, heart disease, diabetes, people are dying from that because they're not going to the doctor because it's not meaningful access.
And you know, the thing that we always like to say is you are eliminating the for-profit middlemen in between you and your doctor. There is no reason for them to exist. And I have no doubt that as much as the biggest lobbyists on Capitol Hill are big pharma and private insurance, I have no doubt that that is the same thing that happens in Sacramento. It is very much the same. And it's very tempting when you are talking a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of connections. A lot of people have benefited from our for-profit healthcare system at the expense of others not being able to get that coverage. But I'd like to think, and we did some homework, and so of course you were born in a country that does have healthcare.
I was going to say, why would somebody move here from Toronto when you had healthcare to a country without healthcare?
And that certainly is a significant issue. And I really think that one of the biggest issues that we face trying to bring universal health care to the only major developed nation on earth is that most people in this country have never experienced what it's like to have health care in another country. And if they were to experience that, they would have a completely different outlook on why having health care as a right is absolutely necessary. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're kind of brainwashed into thinking that American exceptionalism, our healthcare is the best, or education is the best, so on and so on. I came here when I was 6 years old, so I didn't have much choice. But I will say at the time we were living in a tiny town 3 hours north of Toronto that was covered in snow. My parents came to the Bay Area for a business trip, and if you've been to the Bay Area, you can understand why they wanted to move. And so the reality is that you're right in that people don't know what they don't know. And fear is such a strong motivator. You're going to lose out on what you have. Even if what you have isn't the best, you're going to lose that. And what I've noticed that it's not people are attached to their insurance companies. No one likes calling their insurance company. They like their doctors, their nurses, the dentists they go to. And that's all going to stay the same. And that's what we have to get through to people. But I will tell you one experience I did have out of this country. It was about 18 years ago, I think now, or 17 years ago. I was traveling in Brazil, and I'm not a very strong swimmer, and I almost drowned. And when I say almost drowned, I mean I was done for. A surfer saved my life. Wow. A couple more waves hit me. I wasn't getting back up. I was taken by a helicopter to the hospital. I was the hospital all day in the ER, and then they put fluids and X-rays, all that. When I left, they had me go check out. Obviously, I had my swimming trunks on when I was taken in the helicopter. I didn't have my wallet or passport or anything. They asked for a passport, this, that. I said, I don't have it. They said, you know what? It doesn't matter because it doesn't cost anything anyway. And so, and that was in Brazil in 2004. And so I have had my experience with healthcare in other countries and countries that are not nearly as wealthy as ours, where if I had that extra headache of having to pay $10,000 or $15,000, to talk about putting a damper on a vacation, right? I mean, and that's, presuming I had the ability to pay for it. A lot of people obviously wouldn't have the ability to pay for it, but that's what Americans have to go through every single day. They're just living day by day, hoping that today's not the day they get in a car accident, hoping today's not the day that something happens in the swimming pool, hoping that today's not the day that they have a heart attack, because they can't afford it, and we're just leaving people to die.
I think what you said, I'm sorry. I was just going to say what I think you said about how we have this American exceptionalism and we think that our healthcare is the best. I was just talking with my husband about this today because he's a physician here. And we were at a wedding and there was a bunch of physicians there and a lot of people from like more central Florida area, which is pretty conservative. And there's this doctor standing there going off on how we have the best healthcare system in the world. And I'm thinking, by what standard would that be? Because I know that by any measurable standard, we certainly do not have the best healthcare system in the world. In fact, we have probably one of the worst of the developed world and have the highest costs for the worst outcomes. And yet people still think that what they have is good. And I have a friend who's Rita is in the chat and she's like, it's hard. You have to be able to convince people to not be giving up what they're giving up, but they're not giving up anything. I would argue that we don't need insurance. We don't need insurance. Why have we been sold insurance? We don't need insurance. If you just can go to the doctor and get help when you need help, what do you need insurance for? I don't understand. So when people think that they're giving up their insurance, we don't need any insurance. I mean, for health, I mean, you want car, house, whatever, but like, we don't need that.
But even if you think about it, even like our auto insurance is, you're required to have, but it's heavily regulated. They can't charge $10,000 a month, right? And so the reality is that, and I think Rita in the comments mentioned, I agree, we have to ensure that people don't, that people know they're not going to lose out because you don't have insurance anymore. You still have care, and you'll have care without the headache of having to deal with insurance. But it's going to be really hard to convince, especially since we know that, look, we put a prescription drug pricing bill on the ballot a few years ago, and the pharmaceutical industry spent over $100 million and they beat it. So if they spent $100 million on that, how much do you think, how many hundreds of millions will they spend to defeat single payer? It's going to be a lot. And so this is something where we have to talk to one another. We have to, it's uncomfortable at times to talk about politics, this, that, and the other, but this is about more than that. I think we have to talk to our family, our neighbors, our friends. And when I talk to friends that are doctors, the practice of medicine is pretty miserable now. And they spend hours a day arguing with insurance companies, trying to get care for their patients.
Yeah. And not only that, but they negotiate like pennies on the dollar to get payback. And Florida's managed care here is a nightmare. I mean, I know California has been bad for a long time. My father-in-law is a physician in Southern California. And coming here, it was a little bit better, but now it's ridiculous. The amount of time, staffing, effort that goes into dealing with managed care is outrageous. And that doesn't even take into consideration that you're having people that are not medical people making decisions on medical care that are based on trying to screw us. And what's interesting is normally physicians are not pretty pro single payer, but my husband would rather not be paying for health insurance for his employees. Like he does not think that should be tied to employment. Because it shouldn't be. But so even though there is a certain amount in the medical community that is not big on this, there are a whole bunch of them that are sick and tired of dealing with managed care and having to have a whole staff just to deal with managed care.
Jen, if you could put Guy Giberson's question up.
I'm sorry.
And a great question, Ash. Obviously, private insurance and big pharma go hand in hand. And as we know, and we've heard many a times, the cost of prescription drugs just in Canada alone costs about 10% of what it costs here in the States. So how would dealing with price fixing, price gouging work with CalCare in the statewide universal system?
Well, if everyone's in one system, then that's the system that the pharmaceutical companies have to negotiate with. And so I think that's really what it comes down to. That's why Medicare typically and the VA certainly will have lower prices as well, is that they can negotiate with millions or tens of millions of individuals that are members, so to speak. Well, we have 40 million people in our state. So if you can negotiate on behalf of 40 million people, that's how you can keep the prices down, especially if you have competing pharmaceutical medications, right? Especially if you have generics available, what have you. It actually gives you bargaining power. And that's what we don't have now. If you're an employer, you don't have bargaining power. If you're an individual trying to get health insurance or pharmaceuticals, you don't have bargaining power. And so what we want to do is create bargaining power with 40 million Californians, where we can now negotiate down the rates of pharmaceuticals, as well as how much services cost on the delivery side as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I believe this is something that can be done, and there'll be more bargaining power on a national level when it does eventually happen, because then there's like not even the threat of not having to negotiate with a particular company. But I think that California is big enough that it would definitely you would have to negotiate. Like they would have to have lower prices. Yeah. I mean, we have the only country where our government allows companies to like rape its people. Yeah. Like no other country allows that to happen. So we have like no protection whatsoever.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And you'll see for the same procedure, even in the same hospitals, sometimes people with insurance, the insurance companies are charging 2, 3, 4, 5 times more. They'll charge someone on Medicare or Medi-Cal $500. They'll charge someone with insurance $4,000. Well, we're all paying for that, right? We're paying for that gross profit taking at the end of the day. And so, it all has a cost to it. So do we have the best medical system in the world? Well, we have the best medical system that money can buy if you have the money to buy it. Yeah. And the problem is most people don't.
And one of the things that you brought up a little earlier, Ash, which I think was very important, is the fact that we don't have a universal system, and the fact that people go bankrupt in our healthcare system. There is no way to measure the impact that stress has on your health. And there is no question that by not having that safety net, the increase in stress adds to the disadvantage that we have when it comes to the fact that so many people do have health problems. But if we did have a universal system, there is no question that would mitigate a lot of that problem. There would be a lot less of that, well, now I have to worry, am I going to be able to go to the doctor, the dentist? And that's not something that is going to occur now. And I really think that as much as anything can also be hammered home in regards to, how do we convince more people that this is absolutely necessary? It just makes sense. It's just a matter of how we get that message out. So my question would be, where would you say are, obviously we know what Anthony Rendon did a couple of years ago. There's always going to be the rotating villain. That's how politics works. It'll be somebody else next time. Where can we make the impact that you need in regards to the state legislature finally getting this to the governor's desk? What is it that you need right now that will allow this to take the next step?
We need as many people in California signing up in support, so that when I go back to Sacramento, we just finished session on Friday. I'm going to be back in January, and that's when I hope to have the bill heard. I can go to my colleagues and they'll have heard from their constituents. Let's keep in mind that 4 years ago, and I know Rendon, gets criticism, but I think he was very clear. He's like, look, show me how you're going to pay for it. Show a funding mechanism. And the reality is that the author at the time didn't have interaction with them at all. I've been talking with his office for months on this. They've been they're not only cooperative, they've been kind of partnering in terms of getting information, offering suggestions on funding. In fact, I'm going to New York, to DC, New York, and Canada in October. And the speaker's protocol office is helping me to arrange meetings. So it's not a matter of, when something like this fails, it's never one person. At the end of the day, you have to remember, whether it's a speaker, what have you, that they are doing the will of their caucus. We have 80 assembly members, 60 of whom are Democrats. Well, we have to get, at least 54 of those Democrats on board, and that's going to take a lot of political will and people organizing. It can be done, but it's a lot, and it's a lot of work. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to ensure that we can make that happen. And at least get the bill not only into committee, get it heard in health committee, get it heard in the revenue and tax committee, so that we can get the policy conversation on the record and have people give an up or down vote.
And I want to nip this question that John Dennis just posted in the bud. I say this all the time. This is a very easy answer. How do we overcome the argument that universal health care will lead to rationed health care? This is government-funded health care, not government-run. So stop selling it as something that it isn't. I want to say that right now we already have rationed health care. Yeah.
Right now, our insurance companies are the gatekeepers. They are rationing healthcare. They are telling us when we can have a procedure. Our doctor is not. The insurance company is telling the doctor yes or no as to whether we can get a procedure, what have you. And what oftentimes happens is we are just pumped up full of drugs, because it's revolving. We get pumped up full of drugs to kind of mask our underlying health issues until we have a major catastrophic issue. Then we have to pay for a really expensive surgery. What we need to do is focus on preventative medicine, focus on the stuff that doesn't make insurance companies a bunch of money, which is having time with our doctor to talk about our health, talk about fitness, talk about nutrition. Right now, if I go see my doctor, the same doctor I've seen for many, many years, he used to spend 10, 15 minutes with me. I'm lucky if I get 2 minutes with him, and that's not his fault.
No.
No,
they're like quadruple booking. They're forced to quadruple book because of the money that's getting skimmed out and going to middle management. Yeah,
that's right. And they're fighting with the insurance companies to make sure that they can do what they need to do. But I'll tell you, doctors more and more, the second you have any high cholesterol, the second you have any issues, well, why don't you get on this pill, get on that pill? And, people end up being on 5, 10, 12 pills every day the rest of their life, because you're not getting the kind of advice you need from your medical professional, because they don't have the time to give it and to monitor it. And so for their liability's sake, and of course for this whole profit cycle to continue, they just put us on more and more pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Obviously,
it's been a problem forever, though, I think, with Western medicine in general. I've been with the same person for 30 years through med school, through residency, through all of that. They don't ever teach them about things like nutrition and fitness, and they don't teach them that. They don't care. So it's a cultural thing to some extent, but it's not good, because all of those things, I very much am a fan of all of the stuff, but it does keep us healthier. That is the point. And there's an incentive for people to do that, by the way, when you do have universal health care. There is a people to do that, to educate other people when they know we're all paying for everybody's health care.
And some of the managed, some Kaiser, others now are starting to give some incentives for their customers to do that, and because their patients to do that, right? Because they know it makes sense. And in fact, we had a bill several years ago, I can't remember, maybe it was 10 or more years ago, maybe even 15, to actually add to the medical licensing and the continuing education, nutrition and what have you. And at that time, CMA fought it. They didn't want to have that. And so let's keep in mind that we're talking about an industry, a medical industrial complex that feeds on itself. We have to push back. I myself am vegan and plant-based, and I've been doing that for a few years. Again, as part of my health regimen, what have you. But it wasn't a doctor that told me that. I did my own kind of study on it, right? Although, when you do get sick and what have you, then they do say, why don't you do a plant-based recover or we have cancer, what have you, they should be telling us nutrition. And I'm not strictly saying vegan. I'm just saying, tell us about nutrition. Let us make up our own mind. But we don't hear about it at all, you know?
Because in a for-profit system, we are not in the we are in the business of fixing problems, not in the business of preventing problems. There's not enough money.
That's what I see. We're not in a, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease management system.
That is correct. And that stems a lot from basically, in a lot of ways, what has happened over the past year. You know, California obviously was one of the hardest hit states for COVID, and you know, just seeing the whole dynamic of how many lives would have been saved if we had a universal healthcare system, and also treating it as health care, not health management, obviously would have gone a much further way. And it's obviously it's a good opportunity to transition to the elephant in the room. We all know what it is. You know, we actually put out on social media a week ago that if Governor Newsom had just come out and endorsed CalCare and said, look, we got to get this to my desk, I'll sign it as soon as you get there, that would have been it. And I don't think anybody would be questioning whether he would have to worry about whether he's going to get recalled tomorrow, and there's a reasonable chance he will be. And I do think that they say that when a vulnerable politician is a persuasive politician, and I really wish a lot more people were harping on this idea that, look, he's in a vulnerable spot. There is momentum here. You do need to try to create as much as you can. And yet it seemed like a lot of the people that we saw in sort of like, you know, the force the vote movement and everybody who wants universal health care, they weren't really harping on that. And we thought, heck, this is a great opportunity here. So my question to you, Ash, how did we get here? There's a lot of people on the outside looking in who have their opinions about, you know, how did Governor Newsom, you know, get to the point where now it looks like he could very well lose his position. Where do you see it from an objective perspective as to why tomorrow might be a pretty significant day politically speaking?
Well, a couple of things. One is I think he's going to beat the recall pretty handily. I think that once Democrats woke up as what was happening, look, in our state, Republicans, the only relevancy they have is to use things like the recall method to try to get on the ballot, fundraise, and all that. They can't win in regular elections. Governor Newsom, you know, trounced John Cox just 3 years ago. He'll beat the recall, but I will tell you that, you know, I'm chair of the Progressive Caucus. I'm also chair of the Assembly Labor and Employment Committee. And I've been very strongly opposing the recall, as have a lot of other progressives that are very clearly in favor of single-payer healthcare, including the nurses. After we beat the recall, you better believe that comes, you know, September 14th will beat the recall. September 15th, we're going to be back to holding everyone accountable, including the governor. The governor campaigned in favor of single payer. And I think he has the opportunity for a historic opportunity to lead California as the first state. And look, and he does have courage in him. You know, over a decade and a half ago, he was the first mayor, when he was mayor of San Francisco, to support marriage equality. And at that time, they said that was the end of his political career. And he did it anyway. And so he does have the courage in him. So I'm hopeful that after we beat back the recall, we can get him on the right side of history.
I hope so, because we had Larry Elder was our bootlicker of the week last week, because that is just not somebody that I want to see in any sort of more power position at all.
And it also speaks to the extremism of the party, that even in a state like California that's so dominated by the Democrats, you would think that the GOP would be wise enough to have at least a reasonable centrist moderate candidate. And yet the person that they've put at the top is somebody who is no different than a Rush Limbaugh, or, as you know, two guys in your neck of the woods, Michael Savage or Mark Levin. And so, you know, they've created this very toxic environment. But, you know, when things are not going well, personalities like that, the carnival barkers of the world, they generate a lot of momentum, and it's an unfortunate thing to see. And they're all, and not just Elder, all of them are running as Trumpers. All the 4 or 5 leading Republicans, including one of my colleagues, they're all running as pro-Trumpers. They're already talking about how the election is going to be stolen tomorrow with, you know, fake ballots and all that. So they're already starting it before the election's even finalized. Yeah, and that again speaks to where so much of the problem lies in, you know, the misinformation campaigns that get thrown out there, because it does, you know, create, again, in a society right now that is struggling so mightily. California is a great example of that. And that's another great transition, Ash, because if there is a state that is the poster child for the housing crisis that we have in the United States, there is no state where it probably is worse. So if you could speak to, what type of initiatives you guys are taking, to deal with this issue, because obviously it is very, very significant. We know all about the 10 cities that popped up all over, up and down the coastline in the state. What is going on in Sacramento to try to mitigate the housing crisis, and what is hopefully going to be done to solve it if possible?
Hold on 1 second here. I think that my battery's going to die if I don't charge it real quick.
That's okay.
No, it's okay. You lost visual, but we still have audio.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the housing thing in California is crazy. I remember just learning about the fact that how many people work full-time jobs, make regular, what would be normal salaries, and yet they live in their cars. And especially in the part of California where you are, I would imagine it's particularly bad.
Where I live is the most expensive. I think, let me just, okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
It happened to me early in the podcast, so you're not alone.
Well, my laptop was like fully charged, but I forgot how much. When you're doing multimedia, the bandwidth, it really takes the energy quickly. But in any case, so housing. I live in the San Jose metro area. It's the most expensive market in the nation, along with San Francisco. The average median home price is well over $1 million, as much as 1.3 plus million. And so what I oftentimes say is housing is healthcare. That if you don't have a roof over your head, clearly your healthcare outcomes are going to be poor. But I also think the other way around as well. If you don't have healthcare, having a roof over your head isn't enough to keep you protected. And so I think that, again, when I talk to individuals that are unhoused in my community, oftentimes you will hear along the chain of events that led to them becoming unhoused is an issue with their health. Something happened with their health and they lost their job. Something happened with their health. They got in an accident. They couldn't pay the bills. There is a very clear connection between the strain that healthcare costs creates, coupled with the strain of housing costs. It's all cumulative. And so if we can relieve one aspect of that strain, that is such a huge burden lifted off individuals. As was said earlier, you talk to folks in Canada, what have you, no one has a perfect healthcare system, but one thing they will always tell you is, I don't have to stress about it. It's one level of stress taken away. And what we've also been trying to do here in recognizing that housing is healthcare is even find ways to unlock some of the funds that come into our counties for medical treatment, for housing. Because at the end of the day, we spend so much when it comes to ambulance and fire services, healthcare service, emergency room services for those that are unhoused, that it's better to use even some of the healthcare money to get a roof over someone's head. And that will dramatically lower societal cost when it comes to our healthcare system. And so it's all connected. When we're talking about social justice, we're not talking about just justice in our healthcare system. And we're talking about justice, economic justice, we're talking about criminal justice reform. We're talking about environmental justice. There's a reason why Dr. King spoke of healthcare as the most cruel form of injustice that exists. And the reason why he said that is because at the time there was segregation in our hospitals. And it's one thing to have segregated schools. It's one thing to have segregated neighborhoods. But when you have segregated hospitals, that is an extreme level of immorality. Well, that's where we are now. Maybe we don't have segregation where we have a sign on the front of the hospital, but we do have, for practical purposes, we do have segregation where you have certain hospitals that don't take Medicare or Medi-Cal. We have certain hospitals that are so exorbitant in cost that you cannot walk through those doors. And predominantly the people that can't walk through those doors are poor people, people of color. If you look at the life expectancy drop from 2019 to 2020, we saw for the first time ever life expectancy drop 2.7 years for our African-American brothers and sisters, and 2 years for Latinos. That is dramatic. And when some people say, well, yeah, that accounts for the beginning of COVID. Well, yeah, that's part of the point, that Black and Latino individuals are dying from COVID because they have the underlying conditions that lend them to die from COVID, because they don't have preventative care. They don't have meaningful access to health care. And so COVID is proving the point of why we need single-payer health care. And there's no doubt that it's all connected with an economic system which is crushing families in America.
Yeah, I think and that was one of the things, Peter, we talked about that I liked when we ran with brand new Congress. It wasn't so much policy driven as it was this sort of Bill of Rights, this idea that what you're entitled to based on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that those things cannot exist with the level of economic injustice that is in this country, because it is all connected. And I think one of the ways that we sort of, that our corporate overlords get away with depriving us of those things is that it is so segmented, and it's not viewed as intersectional in a way that it should be. And it's easy when you can just separate housing is here and healthcare is here and the environment is here, and all of these things are separate. And so it just sort of keeps everybody divided and just fighting in different ways, instead of realizing that how it is all connected. And it is, to me, it's very much about justice. And it's all about justice. And I do not understand how we have so many empty houses and empty buildings that they cannot stop building them. And yet there are all these people with nowhere to live. That is, to me, this is it's de facto evidence of corruption. And it's one of those things. I don't know. Do you have a law background, Ash?
I was a public defender for 11 years.
Okay, so you know. When I'm driving on the highways and I'm seeing that down here, like what our infrastructure looks like, and it is such a mess, and it's filled. You could be in one of the poorest countries of the world, and their roads would probably not look that different from some of our highways here in South Florida. Sure. And when I'm looking at that, to me, it's like, I know there's corruption because res ipsa loquitur. Because it's like when you know you're putting money into a system and you don't see any benefits coming out of the system, you know the money's going somewhere. Yeah. So it's like, to me, all of this is just evidence of just mass amounts of corruption, and because it's not lack of resources.
Well, there's two more things that I will say in response to that. One is that the system is working as intended. And what I mean by that is they want people to be in fear. They want people to have their job and they have their insurance. Well, I can't leave my job because I lose my insurance. They want people to be in fear. It's like, we can end homelessness tomorrow, but seeing the homeless puts fear, especially in the working class community, that if they don't stay in line, if they don't walk that fine line, that could be them. Right. And so that's part of why we're not ending these things that could be ended tomorrow. And there's this again, going back to American exceptionalism, there's also this kind of fawning over billionaires, fawning over the wealthy. They're the moral ones. They're the ones doing everything right. If you only did what they did, if you were only like them, you too could be successful. And it's this constant fear. And I'll say the other thing I wanted to say is, look, Dr. King was assassinated, when he was striking for garbage workers, for sanitation workers in Memphis. And it was just a handful of weeks before the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. They were afraid of that because he was demanding economic justice. And
we talk about that all the time. We talk about that. That's what got him killed. That's what got him killed.
They couldn't. It's one thing if you just get a collection of folks that are marching, but he, as an individual voice, was way too powerful to lead this fight for economic justice. The Poor People's Campaign for Jobs and Economic Justice is what the full title is. And so it's still happening. We're still in that same march, and we've actually taken steps backwards. And that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid people are going to wake up and realize that we have a system built on the backs of the working class. And that if the working class just stand up, it topples the whole system down.
There is no question, and we say this all the time, a non-corporate, non-partisan labor movement is what is going to allow us to take that next step. And it takes time, but you're seeing a lot of the strikes that have been happening to your neighbors of the North in Oregon, obviously with the Nabisco workers. They're doing an amazing job there. We had one of their representatives on, as well as some of the coal strikers in Alabama. And I think the more that we build up, and again, the nurses of California, that's a labor movement. Yeah. So as far as we can see it, that's how this is going to unfold. We're going to build
huge intersectionality with labor and healthcare. Huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had great conversations with labor. It was wonderful to see earlier this year when they had their lobbying day in Sacramento. It was mostly done online on Zoom, but my bill was one of their bill priorities. The head of the building trades, when he had his few moments to speak, said now is the time for single payer. I think especially, we have a very powerful labor movement. Unite Here, the hotel workers are inspirational. And they recognize that as much as they bargain for good health care, something like COVID hits, and now 80% plus of their members are out of work. And it didn't matter that they bargained for good health care when their jobs are gone. And so we have a tremendous labor movement that is going to be a huge part of getting single payer done in our state. And we have to stop, we have done some good things incrementally. We expanded Medi-Cal to undocumented workers 50 years old and older. We have more healthcare availability in California than pretty much anywhere else in the country. But what I oftentimes say is incrementalism is the best argument against incrementalism, because every time you do it, we end up saving money and more people get care. So we're proving the case of why we just need to go full force into single payer, because if we just provide healthcare to everyone and do it in a way that's compassionate, everyone in and no one out, that's going to save us the most amount of money, prevent the most amount of death, and create the greatest access we can possibly have.
Ash, we have made it very clear on our show that the issues that we are fighting for are issues that most people agree with, but that really going after these specific issues, electoral politics matter, movements matter, but really honing in on these very specific things like CalCare, like the New York Health Act, is what we're all about, and I think can unite the most amount of people, much like how we're helping the firefighters with legislation at the federal level. This is the type of thing that I think will really garner the most support. And so when session comes back in January of 22, if there is anything that we can do to help in terms of increased awareness, if there are specific districts that really need more of a grassroots movement in terms of the representation, in terms of what it's going to take to get it to the governor's desk in order to make it a reality, we are going to be here to help you in whatever capacity that we can. I think this conversation has been fantastic. I'm sure, Jen, you would agree. If there is anything that you would like to plug or mention before we depart for the evening, the floor is yours. Please do so.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on and continuing the drumbeat for single payer and so many other progressive needs and causes. And the reality is, again, these kinds of pieces of legislation are movement building. We need movements to make them happen, because we know we're right on the policy, we're right on the fiscal aspect of it, we're right on the morality of it. It checks all the boxes time and again, every report, every study. We know we're on the right side of the issue. It's a matter of political will. And political will happens when a movement demands it. That's how the Civil Rights Act happened. That's how we see big things happen in our nation. And so I'm asking all of you, if you can continue to build that grassroots movement, work with the nurses. The nurses are doing a great job. They're continuing to have, they're online. They're really sharing strategies on it. There's Healthcare Los Angeles doing a great job on every Sunday. They have office hours to answer questions. There's a movement building within districts. The city of LA just passed unanimously support for AB 1400 CalCare. So there's plenty of work that needs to be done to get the grassroots support, so that when I go to my colleagues, and I'm going to spend a lot of time in the next 3 to 4 months traveling up and down the state, meeting one-on-one with my colleagues. I want them to understand the policy. I want them to know that this is something that I'm taking. So I'm not doing this to run for some other office next year. I'm not doing this for my own health or popularity. I'm doing this because of other people's health and that people are dying. And that if I can ensure that CalCare would pass and I don't hold public office the rest of my life and my name is forgotten in history, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yep.
And so we need people to understand this is not about me or about any one of us. It's about all of us. And it's about making sure that California takes the lead. New York, I'm happy if New York takes the lead with us, but we have to push it in DC. It's not going to happen, I truly believe, until states take the lead and show that it can be done.
Much like your birth country, they passed it in Saskatchewan first, and then they pushed it throughout the whole country. That is exactly how we believe.
His name was Douglas. He was the premier of Saskatchewan, and his last name was Douglas. I'm telling you, I am just abundant with healthcare history knowledge now.
Mr. Kalra, it has been a true pleasure, and we certainly would love to have you on again. And if there's an opportunity, there is an opportunity for us to get to the West Coast in 2022 to assist in any way, we certainly will be in touch with that as well. And we thank you for coming on Generational Change.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Have a wonderful evening.
Lovely.
Well, this is the importance of our podcast. If you truly don't think that there are good people out there that are making an impact and that are doing what they can to help us get to where we need to go, you need to stop watching all of the incendiary shows that are telling you that everything is lost and that everything is hopeless.
Yeah, and I've got to say to Courtney, who's talking about here we go. But the thing is that then how would you explain how this worked in Canada? Because this went there and they weren't their own sovereign currency in Saskatchewan. And that's how they ended up with national health care. So it can happen. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how many more people have to die between now and then. And somewhere in there, somebody asked, what is a state assembly? And it's just a state legislature. Just some states call them assemblies and some states
New York calls it assembly. Some call it city commission. Some call it city council. So
yeah,
really
it's a state legislature.
One half a dozen the other. And what you have to remember, and I will say this to everybody, you are never, and I mean ever, passing single-payer health care on Capitol Hill. It's not happening. The only way it's going to happen is if you create enough momentum outside of Capitol Hill and people already have health care in order to make it so. You passed cannabis legalization at the state level, and then almost immediately all these other states started jumping on board. And now they don't even, again, do they need to take cannabis off of a Schedule I narcotic in Washington, D.C.? Well, as long as Joe Biden's president, probably not happening. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a significant change. And for all intents and purposes, cannabis is more or less legal at this point. And it started with a state mandate. We need to have the same thing with healthcare. And I'm telling you, it's just going to take one domino. We get one state to pass universal healthcare at the state level, it'll move like wildfire. That's how it's going to happen. That's why they work so damn hard to not let any state garner momentum for universal health.
Because they know it's like dominoes.
100%. 100%.
So do you want to do focus on Florida?
You cannot conclude the evening without talking about our wonderful state. And I say that tongue in cheek because there's always something going on. But as you guys know, COVID is still running rampant, but now it looks like it's getting to our kids.
Well, go figure, because school started. So in this week in Florida's COVID corner, which is now what I'm just going to start calling it. So the number that just came out is unsettling because apparently there were 254,412 childhood COVID infections at the end of July. But 146,604 from July 30th to September 2nd. So the increase is so exponential from school reopening that to not see the correlation is just completely obtuse. So, I'm not going to get into mask mandate conversation, but just the numbers are really speaking volumes.
Yeah. And we even said, look, DeSantis has walked a very fine line as governor in not making missteps that would actually hurt his electoral chances. But when you start messing with the kids, that's a very big no-no. And that's something that I think could bite him in the ass. And this is something right now, as you're seeing, it doesn't look good. It really speaks a lot to the fact that, look, if he wanted to throw red meat to his base, that's one thing. But once it became clear, and as we always say, we are a county-strong state. And when the county starts saying, no, we're having mass mandates, and that's that, he should have let the fight go.
So I want to clarify that right now the kids who have died were previously compromised. Okay, so that is true. However, otherwise healthy kids are now facing multi-system inflammatory syndrome about a month after they become infected by the virus. The syndrome, also known as MIS-C, is an inflammation of the heart, lungs, kidneys, brain, skin, eyes, or gastro organs, and the syndrome can also affect individuals who only had mild cases of COVID. So it's, we're sort of learning as we're going with this, but I think that to say that there's not a link between the kids going back to school and having an increase in COVID is ridiculous. So it would then follow that masks would probably be a smart move. Just saying.
Again, choosing to die on the hill of, I don't want you to be wearing masks, it's like, okay, then you just have to find another path. And of course, what apparently is not happening, and this is Florida, so it's not surprising, why are you not offering online classes as an option? Why would you, if kids are comfortable or parents are comfortable with their kids being in the classroom, that's fine. But I guarantee you, there are a lot of parents in blue and red counties that don't want their kids in the classroom. They would be much more comfortable, cheese sandwich, there you go, with having their kids at home. And as long as they are in the classroom virtually, what is the difference? As far as I'm concerned, I understand that there are concerns about, well, the parents have to work and the kids can't actually be home. Now that becomes an issue of whether or not we're actually taking care of our kids in the state. And as we know, Florida is not one that really does a good job of that. So my guess is that one of the reasons why there isn't heavy advocacy for having homeschooling as of right now is because parents simply can't afford to homeschool them.
Well, that's a huge part of it. And then, you've got people that need to be back at work. And I do sympathize with that. That is a huge part of it. But it definitely goes to the need for at least taking as many precautions as you can take.
Have to get creative. And that's more or less, that's evolution in many ways. And so, of course, Florida is ground zero for climate change. And we really shouldn't even call it climate change anymore. It's a climate crisis.
It's just the truth is, it's just our climate.
Yeah.
It's catastrophic and a crisis, but it's just our climate. It's really not. I mean, yeah, it's getting warmer, but this is just the nature of what's happening. But
we've been saying for a while, and as you've been saying, that Miami is going to be underwater. Now, is the tide going to rise, 200-300 feet in the air, and it's going to take all the buildings? No.
I'm going to tell you about that because apparently there's something in South Florida that's called king tide, and it is something where coastal flooding can occur even when there's nice weather, on days when there's no rain. It's even sometimes referred to as sunny day flooding. So a king tide is something that does periodically happen. However, we are going to be experiencing higher than normal seasonal tides, potentially causing flooding through December. And this is because even though king tides are normal, when they coincide with severe weather events, hurricanes that linger for days and other like warming over the water events, it just it exacerbates it and makes it so much worse. So South Florida is seeing sea level rise between 2 to 4 millimeters per year. While it might not sound like a lot, it does add up over time. But the bigger issue is that our infrastructure is just not capable of withstanding a lot of this.
And
so
that really is what it comes
a lot
down
of problems.
to. Jen is from North Miami. And for anybody who has been to North Miami, the way it has evolved over the past half century, you can go there on a day when it rains for maybe an hour and it will flood.
Oh, yeah.
I
mean, when I growing up there were days where we would just not wear shoes and just walk around and the water would just be up to our ankles and we would take like boards and we used to call it apple boarding and like just go kind of skimming down the streets. So we've always had that. That's why, as I tried to explain to you, we have swales instead of curbs, but that's just one of the things we have, but it is getting exponentially worse. And so people need to be aware, and this is going to be particularly bad in Monroe and Miami-Dade counties, which for people who don't know, Monroe is the Keys. So it makes sense that it would be really bad there. So anyway, that's what's happening.
Monroe. But if you want to go to Key Largo, Montego, baby, why don't we go? As the song goes. That is Monroe County. So that is the strip that runs all the way. It doesn't even really look like a county. It's just this, long strip of land that runs all the way to Key West. And that is what is just below Miami-Dade County. And so no surprise. And again, the east coast of Florida is going to feel it a lot worse than the west coast because of the way the water moves along the ocean front of the Atlantic versus the Gulf. And so this is becoming a problem where, we said it would take 30 years, a generation for Miami to not be habitable. It may be sooner than that.
I honestly am picturing something more like 10 to 20. And I'm being serious because it isn't so much about, and I've said this before, it isn't so much about the water rising and crashing over buildings. It's about it rising up underneath our peninsula, up through the limestone and decreasing our fresh drinking water. That's the serious problem we're facing.
Yeah, let me tell you, when you're swimming in Ish, you're not going to like it because that's what's coming next. And
hey, Josh.
You're not really recognizing the fact. Part of the reason why so much real estate, particularly around where Jen lives and to the west, has exploded because people recognize that the value of land at higher surface levels is going to be what is going to become prime real estate in Florida.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like where I am is actually part of the highest ground in Broward County, which for people who don't live in Florida, it's not saying much, but like where I am, when you look at the map of Florida and it's completely post-apocalyptic and underwater, and there's this little green ridge that goes through, that's where my house is. It's on like this thing called Pine Island Ridge.
Yeah, Florida is going to get to the point where it's only going to become a truly habitable state without rising tides and the constant changing of the climate. That's only going to be felt when you get all the way up to the Panhandle area where it's connected to the rest of the continental United States. We are a peninsula. So much of our state.
It's going to be.
It's got. I think it's 75, 80% of the land mass in the state of Florida is surrounded by water. So that's a problem. It is. Yeah. And it unfortunately is something that's getting worse. But, again, we're not trying to be morbid here. What we're saying is.
Don't speak for yourself. I'm being morbid. Florida's going to be underwater.
But I would rather fight than not fight.
Well, yes, we could do whatever we can to make it as habitable for as long as we can. But let's get on to our more entertaining stories, because we've got one Florida and one what I'm calling like the Florier. Yeah. We don't get Florier stories very often, so this was kind of cool. But there is apparently a gentleman that is now being referred to as Toll Booth Willie that was arrested. Oh yes, Florida man is at it again, and this time was arrested after exposing himself to toll booth workers on Florida roadways. According to Florida Highway Patrol, 41-year-old Mark Anthony Filia was arrested for multiple accounts of indecent exposure. Troopers say that Filia had been flashing workers at toll booths around Central Florida between August 29th and September 5th. He was having a jolly holiday Labor Day weekend. According to statements, Filia was showing his privates, exposing his intimate parts, and had no clothes on. Go.
What did he
go
just
you.
have? Did he just had on like a trench coat or something?
No, I don't think he was wearing a trench coat. I just did that for the graphic, and plus it's flashing, so it just kind of seemed funny. but no, I think good for this guy that he's obviously contributing to Florida revenue, because if he's going to all the toll booths, he's paying for them. So he's paying our toll system to flash them, which is gross, arguably. But there is at least a revenue aspect. That was just something that I found somewhat amusing. And then the cat video.
And the one thing I will say about the Florida man is that you guys have to understand, while there are issues in other states, we really, really make a habit out of having we are the butt end of every joke. We are the link of the country. And so it's not unheralded that we get these stories all the time.
And I would encourage people to, if you are so inclined, because I didn't want to use the guy's face, even though it's on the story. Like, I just feel like that.
I think that's much better choice.
What I did?
Yeah, that's a much better decision.
Yeah, there's no need to put some guy's face up there, but like, it really, if you guys check it out, it really does tie the whole story together. But we did have something very exciting happen right here.
Story, a feel good story to wind the night down on. And so, as it turns out, there was a football game at the University of Miami.
Was at Hard Rock. It was at Hard Rock Stadium. Mm-hmm. It was a game between the University of Miami and Appalachian State, which I am a very big fan of Appalachian State.
If anybody knows anything about Miami Gardens, it is a very urban area, and there are a lot of I guess what you would call feral cats that run around. And so it's not entirely unheralded that a cat would find its way onto one of the catwalks at the Hard Rock Stadium. But as it turns out, as a cat was dangling from the upper deck, a bunch of fans did what they needed to do in order to save this cat's life. And
you guys check out the video. It's really cool. Basically, you see this cat like dangling from its like claws on the upper level, and all the people down below were scurrying and basically took a flag or a banner and created a catching thing. So when the cat eventually fell, it landed in the thing, and the cat was actually fine. But it was just pretty cool.
No, and that's and again,
Laurier.
It is. It's a great story. It's just one of those things that reminds us that despite our differences as humans, and we have a lot of them, when it comes to cats and dogs, we always seem to find a way to come together. That is something that I think universally most people agree on. If cats or dogs are in distress, we are there. We will do what we have to do in order to help. That's no political lines, bottom line.
Yes.
So Jen,
and so it was nice.
we are going to conclude this night. As you guys know, there was a very somber anniversary over the weekend. I was at Ground Zero, captured some very touching moments, including one of a widow who lost her husband in the North Tower. It was a employee at Cantor Fitzgerald who lost more people than anybody else by far on 9/11, because they were the firm that occupied all of the floors above the impact zone in the North Tower, and it was a total of 650 plus employees. It was amazing. And the one thing about 9/11 that still drives me crazy to this day is how politicized it has become. And I got into this conversation, I won't even call it an argument, with somebody who I won't mention from the other day, who, when I suggested that Nancy Pelosi showing up at Ground Zero on Saturday was a bad look and completely gratuitous, to say the least, tried to give the rebuttal argument of, well, Kevin McCarthy would have been there if the Republicans were in power. Let me tell you something. The one thing I can say about the GOP, they don't do gratuitous type stuff.
They're not anywhere near as maudlin, and I just want to point out that I am very not maudlin.
Yes, but you do have the people in the GOP who do that, but they stick out like a sore thumb, like Ted Cruz. See, Ted Cruz likes to do stuff like that, and anytime he does it, he looks like a complete and utter buffoon, and everybody calls him on it. But the fact that nobody, and I mean, it seems.
Do you want to read the story?
Am I reading it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read it. Once upon a time, there was a woman who was so self-important that everything was about her. She never missed an opportunity to capitalize on people's grief. George Floyd. Of course, she had to make an appearance on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 to commemorate the day that justified Congress relinquishing its war powers, so that people like the self-important woman could profit off the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Per her usual complete and utter tone deafness, the self-important woman will never recognize those people because there is no profit to be had. The end. Of all the people who were out of place, nobody stuck out like the Speaker of the House. Even Hillary Clinton being there, being that she and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, live in Chappaqua, which is from where they are 45 minutes away.
She was the senator for the state. Like, I mean, look, and I have no love for her, whatever. But it wasn't out of, it made sense geographically.
Yes. Senator Schumer being there made sense. He is from Manhattan. The president being there and the first lady being there is perfectly fine. It is what it is. And even former President Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama, fine. We don't
need to dip into Bloomberg because whatever.
Former mayor of New York, whatever. The fact that Pelosi felt the need to be there, to me, just speaks volumes about just how disconnected she really is. And thinking that this was a photo op makes it that much worse. And so when the GOP run their ads in the next 6 months, trust me, they're going to use something like this.
There's no shortage, though. She provides ample material in the realm of the Kente cloth tales of tone deafness.
100%.
This is somebody who has very little, if any, self-awareness whatsoever.
Zero.
It's really fascinating.
Listen, I wasn't going to bring it up with Ash because I'm pretty sure. Actually, I think Ro Khanna is his congressman, if I'm not mistaken. But he knows Representative.
It doesn't look. He wouldn't. There's no point.
There is no point because there are Democrats like Representative Kalra, and then there are Democrats like Speaker Pelosi. And this is an example of the major disconnect that is there. It just, again, when I saw it, because I was there, I was like, what the hell is she doing here? This is so wrong.
You know what's so funny? Like, she really has become like what would be a really good Saturday Night Live skit. Like, instead of it's Pat, it's like, oh, it's Nancy. And it would be like sort of her popping up at every potential opportunity.
Obscure places, like, doesn't make any sense.
Right. The opposite of Where's Waldo, right? Like, there would be like, look, there's Nancy. And it would be like right in front in the camera zone, which it really reminds us of our local congressperson, because that's something that she always does at a local level is show up for the photo.
That is it. Well, that's part. Well, listen, our congresswoman and the speaker happen to be pretty close. So it's not surprising that they have a very, very similar tendencies when it comes to their political acumen, and their awareness is zero, like absolutely zero.
Hey, Mallory, sorry. You know what? If you still want to talk to me about job stuff, feel free to give me a call tomorrow. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you. And I just don't know that I'm necessarily the best person to talk to about job advice, being as I've been unemployed for 12 years. So just saying, but I'm more than happy to chat with you.
The pro bono attorney speaks loudly. So that's But one thing I want to say that I saw in the chat, which I think is important. There are a lot of people who are saying, well, you really can't compare cannabis legalization to universal health care, and that's fine. But what you have to remember is that, especially in a state like California, and especially a state like New York, which have, if I remember correctly, the states with the most congressional representatives who endorse universal health care.
Right.
You're going to tell me that if they passed CalCare in California and they had any issues with budget shortages, you're telling me that those congressional representatives are not going to bring federal dollars back to the state for healthcare purposes? Of course they are. You got to pass the damn bill. I don't want to hear nothing about how we're not completely solvent. It doesn't matter, because once people get a taste of universal health care and what it means to not have to worry about something that should be a basic right, trust me, once you get a hold of it, you're never going to let it go. That's not how it's going to be in this country. And everyone knows that. And nothing's perfect.
Well, it's sort of like then the curtain comes down and you see the man behind the curtain and you realize, wait a minute, we can do this. And then it becomes less and less tolerable. It's just going to be one of those things that happens. I do think.
Great message by Bruce Allen Ross. Absolutely spot on. Agree 100%. That's a very good point. And I think we have to recognize that, as Jen, as you said earlier, everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
Everything is interconnected.
And justice is one of those things. It is. It affects the same people who do not get environmental justice, don't get proper social justice, economic justice. Right. It's generally the same people are just treated with injustice.
Let's knock down that first domino, whether it is in New York or California, or heck, if it's even in Washington State. The only problem with Washington State is that it doesn't have a state legislature that is strongly advocating for it. Whole Washington is doing an amazing job.
Right. They don't have anybody on the inside there. That they don't have enough help on the inside of their state legislature. That's what we have to change.
That's what we have to change. And you know what? To be honest, somebody like Rebecca Parson, if she does not make it to the U.S. Congress in this next run, I would love to see her in the state legislature in Washington, because she is somebody who would be fighting her butt off. Jason Call, same deal. Building that name recognition is everything. It really is. That doesn't mean that if Jen were to run again, that she would absolutely win. But name recognition matters so much to so many. That's sort of why it's this knee-jerk reaction to just go with what you know. And the more we are able to, the Lulu sticker for anybody who wants to become.
Can you please put the thing in the chat and I'll put it up?
I'm actually not able to do that.
Why can't you? You can put something in the chat and then I can just show it. Just put it in the chat.
No, apparently I can't.
You're like neutered from the chat.
Private chat. Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. I think I figured.
Like,
I would
think you could put something in the chat. But guys, if you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. That is free. And if you would like to support what we're doing, which is trying to transition politics.
Now if you want to copy and paste it. So just in case.
Hold on. Okay, that's right. I'm a mom and a homemaker. That's true. But I'm not somebody that really knows about I'm not fresh on the job search circuit. I'm very rusty. We're still using paper resumes.
Jen does provide her attorney services, but it is much more sparingly than somebody who's working at a firm. Let's put it that way. Not a full-time employee at a law firm.
And the thing is, I don't want that. And I don't do billable hours very well. It's something I've done the law firm thing and I've done what that is, and it's not my bag. I don't like to fight about billable hours. So guys, if you want to support, be patrons. You can check out our Patreon page, get the Lulu sticker. So cute. And help support the show. We're transforming politics into service. We interview everybody from candidates, authors, legislators, different people that are working toward creating the justice that we're trying to achieve. Like really everybody that we talk to is somehow someone that we view as part of the process to move us in the right direction. That's really all we're trying to do.
Well, there is no question that much, if not all, of what we do is about turning politics into service. And that is a very monumental task in itself, but we are working very hard on it. And if you guys think that tonight's guest and the show was really good, well, you're in for an even bigger treat on Thursday.
Yes.
Now, I may be available. I may not. It's going to depend on what my circumstances are. I am a huge New York Giants football fan. I will be at the football game at FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland against the Washington football team. I am going to do what I can to make an appearance, but Jen, at the very least, is going to be blessed with two amazing guests. First one, of course, is going to be Stephanie Gallardo, who is going to be running for the U.S. Congress in the state of Washington. I believe it's the 9th district, I want to say. And then, of course, we have a returning guest who we are very fond of, and that, of course, is Thom Hartmann. Jen, you listened to his book?
I did listen to his book, and it was really interesting. And he has a whole series of books called The Hidden History of. We've had him on before to talk about the hidden history of capitalism. This is the hidden history of healthcare. And it's really interesting. The link between why we don't have healthcare and racism is huge. Like there were all these sort of like lines, like weaving between what the reasons are for why we don't have healthcare and the history of it. And it was really interesting. So we will be talking about that on Thursday.
Looking forward to it. Guys, it's been a great show. We really appreciate you coming out tonight. Remember to spread the word, hit the like button, subscribe, comment if you can. Once we drop the video, which will be shortly in the next few minutes, we're doing what we can from a grassroots perspective, no pun intended. But we really appreciate you all. Have a great evening. We'll see you Thursday.
Bye, all.